So we're going to move on to a couple that have been very active in the LHON California community. We have Jerrie and Paul Lohr, and they're going to speak as a couple and what that was like with Paul being affected at a later age, and Jerrie being his sighted supporter, and how they've come through and managed to make it work between the two of them and for Paul coming into the world of LHON. So Jerrie and Paul, please tell us your living with LHON story.
Hi, I'm Paul Lohr.
And I'm Jerrie Lohr.
So I'm 59 years old. Jerrie and I live in Dublin, California, which is a suburb of the San Francisco Bay Area. And we've been married 33 years. I was affected with LHON about 2.5 years ago. In fact, my timeline is very similar to Megan's. And I have mutation 4171, which I understand is a rare one. So my journey with LHON started about 50 years ago because I am probably, and I'll explain that a bit more, the fourth person in my family with LHON. About 50 years ago, my mom was 37 years old. My mom and dad had four children, and the six of us were living on the East Coast. And my mom started to lose her vision and have other neurological issues. And we were living outside of Washington, D.C., so Georgetown University was available for her to get care at. She saw lots of specialists, and in fact was even admitted and went through a series of tests and things. But in the end, she was given a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Not uncommon. We've all heard that before. Fast forward a few years, we actually moved to San Diego to actually get my mom into sort of better weather, better living situation and everything. And my mom regained her vision. I'm not sure exactly how many years it occurred after the onset of what we eventually would learn was LHON, but her sight did improve, but many of her neurological issues did remain through the rest of her life. Now, fast forward to, I think, the mid 2000s, and a cousin of mine, a young cousin of mine, 17 years old, he started having vision issues and lost started losing vision in his right eye and then shifting to the left eye, kind of classic LHON situation, and was diagnosed with LHON, but never really, I don't believe, had any genetic testing. It was just based on really having
symptomatic.
Yeah, symptoms and explaining to neuro-ophthalmologists throughout the East Coast of what had happened with my mom and arriving at the LHON diagnosis. In between my mom's situation and this cousin's situation, there's a possibility that another family member who also had some vision issues probably had LHON, although it was never definitively diagnosed, and that family member passed away really without anybody knowing much about his vision issues. And then fast forward to December 2018 with my situation, and it really didn't take very long for my doctors, first my ophthalmologist, to really figure out that this was probably LHON. After, like many of us have experienced, after they cleared the whole possible brain tumor situation as a possibility for my right eye vision loss, it became apparent it was LHON. But the first genetic testing I had only tested me for the three most common, mutations for LHON, and I obviously did not have one of them. So it actually took quite a while. I did not know my mutation until about 2 years into my LHON journey, personal journey. So anyway, my experience with going to an ophthalmologist first and then being referred to Stanford Byers Eye Institute was actually it all happened very quickly. And again, with the family history, I think it really accelerated me getting the diagnosis. But like so many others, it probably took roughly 9 more months before my vision loss sort of stabilized, and obviously went into from my right eye to my left eye. And so at this time, obviously, Jerrie and I had been married for over 30 years, and I was working in a second career in the country's largest integrated healthcare company based here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I actually decided to take a medical leave of absence. And, at the time I think it was the right thing for me to do. This was hitting me obviously kind of hard, because I really thought LHON was something in my, rearview mirror in life, because at then 56 years old, I really didn't think this was, a possibility. I knew what it was after, my cousin had been diagnosed. I remember talking about it with my optometrist. I was good about my eye care, but, it really, I think,
It was a surprise.
it was a total, a total surprise. I did not know, as I know now, that somebody at 56 years old, male or female, could get the LHON. So anyway, I really focused after a little bit of few months of self-isolation.
It wasn't that long.
Yeah, it probably wasn't that long, but I did focus on technology, and I really wanted to get back into the workplace. But I also knew that my employer was telling me that the position that I was in at the time I became affected, I wasn't going to be able to do that job any longer. And they were right. But fortunately, they did work pretty hard to try to get another position. And, that did eventually come about, and I'll speak to that in a bit. But meanwhile, there were some really positive things that sort of happened to me during I'll call it the onset phase with LHON. And that is, of course, like many of us, and certainly Jerrie was doing the same thing, which was researching as much as we could, and understanding medically what was going on, understanding, what we could do to really live a fulfilling life, with this condition and everything. So, so working for one of the largest integrated healthcare, companies in the United States, I searched out what they might have about LHON, only to find out that there was just 2 things that popped up in the company's intranet search site, and the 2 things were kind of an internal article and an external, like a member-facing article about an employee who had LHON. So I decided to call that person, and it's one of the best things I really could have done, because what that situation did for me was, first of all, he sort of became my early mentor, my early LHON mentor, and it also really catapulted me into the LHON.org support community, or the LHON community. He connected me with Lissa. He connected me, obviously, with LHON.org, just in so much just advice and guidance and knowledge, and it was just a really great turning point, and one of the most positive early things that happened to me. And so with that, I think that, and certainly with Jerrie's motivation, I really started focusing on some of the additional positive things that happened, getting connected with the California Department of Rehabilitation, getting connected with the San Francisco Lighthouse for the Blind, and taking full advantage of programs that they offered, both, obviously the vocational rehabilitation situations, and also the orientation and mobility. I never thought I was going to have to be a person who would use a white cane, but lo and behold, another great thing that happened to me was Lighthouse for the Blind has the Enchanted Hills camp, and I went to basically an adult blind camp. And that really helped me arrive at a point of acceptance of what this is all about. And, the fact that I just got such a great saturation of independent living skills and technology and I was hiding the fact that I was having what I didn't know until I went to Enchanted Hills camp was called Charles Bonnet syndrome. And I was hiding that because I just didn't, I think I didn't even tell Jerrie for probably a month or more into, some pretty weird situations with that. And yeah.
So he said earlier that with my motivation, that's probably not the correct word. I think it's similar to what Chaz mentioned with his wife. Paul was trying to adapt. He was trying to figure out, he's an analyst by nature. It's just kind of the way his brain works. I'm a fixer. I don't wait. I don't analyze. I go out, I figure out the rules. I figure out what's available. I figure out what the tools are, and I sign him up. It didn't matter that he wasn't ready to be signed up. It didn't matter that he was still adapting. I was like, nope, there's these computers that talk. There's things you can put on your head, like VR goggles that can see for you. There's, I had him at meetings for demos for iris vision. I made him go to Berkeley Eye Vision to get all the updates on everything. I'd already looked into DOR. There were already bump dots all over our house. He didn't even know what they were. So we approached everything differently. And the poor guy, if he even said one little thing like, oh, I'm kind of having a problem here. We were talking about it earlier. I need to write a note, and it takes me, a giant piece of paper and a huge pen, and it takes up the entire sheet of paper, my note. And he's always been kind of very environmentally conscious, and he didn't like the idea that he was going to use up an entire forest trying to write somebody's phone number down. So I'm like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? So I search out on the internet. I try to figure out what we can do. Well, that was getting close to the early days of COVID, and suddenly you're seeing kids working from home. Well, what do they use? They use little whiteboards with dry erase markers, big, thick dry erase markers. We have 9 whiteboards around the house with big, thick dry erase markers, and they work great.
That was one of the great sort of joint solutions. I think, I was worried while I was at Enchanted Hills camp, I received a call from my employer basically saying, hey, we think we have a great situation for you to come back to if you'd be willing. It's probably, it's more administrative than probably you're used to, but this could be a really good fit. And I was thrilled at the opportunity, and I took it. But all of a sudden I was like, but how am I going to, and then, you could almost fill in the blank. And I kept doing that with Jerrie, and she really helped me work through a lot of these things. Like I knew that in this job, I was going to have to, quickly write down somebody's medical record number or membership, right, or somebody's photo, whatever. And it was just going to be a quick thing while I went to the computer, now with using assistive technology and everything that I had successfully gotten trained on. And, but that I needed to be able to just get rid of it real quickly too, and not be so wasteful. And boom, she came up with these 9 I'd say they're about 9 by 12 whiteboards that really, they're not the flimsy ones. And I just use them all the time for work. And it was just one of the best, I think it's just one of the best examples of a sort of a solution that we really worked through together. But so I think the next thing we would talk about as a couple here is really the change of responsibilities that sort of, right, unless there's anything else I forgot. No. So I
Driving.
leave this to you. Yeah, driving's the one. Right?
Driving's difficult. And Paul has always loved to drive. He doesn't just drive, he loves to drive. So he's driven all over Europe. He's driven all over the US. He's the guy who, when other people say, oh, I'll go, but I'm not driving, Paul is always the driver. So for 33 years, I've driven back and forth to work, and that's pretty much it. I haven't driven anywhere else, really. And I'm the navigator. So one of the early things we did, because it had already been planned out when Paul's started to lose his vision, was we took a trip with 3 other couples to France. And originally Paul was going to be the driver. Well, Paul's not the driver anymore. So I offered to be the driver. And I thought, that'll be okay. I've never driven in Europe. I've barely driven around home, but it'll be fine. It'll be fine. Because one of the other people offered to be my navigator, because I knew I didn't want to navigate and drive. Except she was very taken by the countryside and the things we're looking at and pretty much everything else. And she quickly lost track of what was happening. So I was trying to drive and navigate, and it was a struggle. It was a struggle for both of us. At one point, they actually closed the road where our little house we had rented was, and they were repaving it, but they didn't put up a sign saying they were repaving it. So I drove down the road and got us trapped. We couldn't turn around. We couldn't do anything. We're just stuck in this little space. And there's a gentleman yelling at us in French, and there's French cats running everywhere. And it was just kind of not the best experience, and probably not one that I would recommend as a big travel trip in your early onset. But we also just got back from Cabo, and we had a wonderful time, but we're 2 years in. So we're better, and we're better at walking, which is just something simple. We like to walk, in the neighborhood and do things together. And I've heard other sighted supporters say the same thing, that you develop sort of a shorthand. Well, I was going to tell you about my day, Curb. I saw Susan today, step, branch. As you're walking, you remind the person that maybe they can't see there's a curb. Maybe there's 4 steps down. Maybe there's a branch that's going to whack them in the head. And you get just really used to it. It doesn't even affect your conversation, really. It just comes out. Whereas in the early days, I'm grabbing his arm and hauling him around and pulling him one direction or the other. But you get better. You get much better. And when we were on our trip just recently, just a few weeks ago, you find when you go to other countries that they don't have as much adherence to what we consider, the Americans with Disabilities Act. There are staircases with absolutely no railings that just drop you to the ground. There are all kinds of things that are a little bit dangerous. So you have to be aware of that. You have to help your person be aware that, okay, you're going to want to stay to the inside because the outside is just a direct fall. And we were traveling with 2 other people, and it was very amusing how quickly they picked up the shorthand, because they had never traveled with us before. They'd never really hiked with us before. And I think it was 2 days in, and they were like, oh, and should we go to that ship, Curb? Should we walk up 4 stairs, but you get better.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think we're moving into kind of an interesting transitional period for us. I think for 2 reasons. One is coming out of the pandemic, and the second thing is I have decided to kind of take an early retirement and really try to focus on probably just improve, trying to improve my, or increase my chances of maybe, getting some improvement in my vision, since I have this 4171 mutation, which they say, and obviously my mother is evidence of this, can have some improvement in within the first 5-year window. And so I've just decided to do that. And I think it's going to be an interesting transition for two reasons. One, how do I fulfill my days now? And two, we're going to be spending a lot more time, together. But I think it's going to lead to a lot more travel. And
now that we've had a successful trip, and we're very happy about it. And we took the trip as sort of a sample, and as we were traveling, we noted things, because Paul also wants to do some traveling on his own.
Yep.
And we were like, okay, so here's the immigration form with print so tiny I can barely read it. What do we do about that? So we just started making notes of things where we're going to have to give some thought. How's it going to work? And it's interesting because none of it even feels mildly insurmountable. It's all very, very doable, very possible. And everything has been very possible. Paul hasn't really changed much what he does. There are some things that I now take over, like driving, but there's some other things that it's just easier if I do it. In the early days, he kept trying to do it and it would take twice as long and we'd usually end up breaking something. But now he knows what he's doing and what he's not doing. And he's still up on ladders every weekend. We pick lemons together. We have a large lemon tree. And I'm at the bottom going, okay, more to your right, more to your left, reach up. You can probably feel it touching the top of your hand, So our lives haven't really changed that much. I think our communication may have gotten a little better.
Yeah, I think communication is really key. I mean, it's obvious and evident in any, any relationship, doesn't matter what stage it's at, but it is paramount with I think with, any couple that's dealing with sort of a life-changing situation, like, being affected, having somebody being affected with LHON. And I think we've done a really good job with that. I really do. So. Yeah. And so I think we're excited about, the road ahead and really continuing to live with, as a couple with LHON. And thank you so much for letting us kind of do this as a couples theme.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. I just don't even know what to say. I loved listening to your story and the way you have both coped individually and together just says so much. And the fact that you just, are planning to travel, early retirement, sounds always great to anybody. And that, like Blake had said, it's willing to get uncomfortable. Like Megan said, it's one task at a time. And I think with the communication, it can make or break a couple. It's, without any medical issues, but when something big comes along, like you said, Paul, a life-changing diagnosis, man, it can make or break a couple. And the fact that you come at it from different directions, but yet still come together in the end to make it work the best for both of you is just, it's just wonderful. And thank you so much for sharing. I've gotten to know you guys from being part of the LHON California committee. And I just adore you guys and the way you work together, even on our calls when we have our committee calls. And thank you so much for sharing a little insight into your personal lives and your LHON story. I so appreciate it.
Thank you, Maria, for everything that you do for the LHON community and you too, Lissa. I certainly owe, you a debt of gratitude, Lissa, for sort of helping both of us as a couple getting to where we're at now.
Well, it's wonderful. And I have to agree, my kids and my partner, they've gotten to say, curb, step, flat, up, down, it's very natural. And I do take notice, and I make it a point to actually say thank you, because, they have taken the time to make that part of their language, if you will, now. And sometimes they just offer to help with knowing I'm going to have a difficulty with something, they just offer to do it. And I've had to learn to say, okay, you can do it for me. Yeah, that's hard too, right, Paul?
Right.
So
That is
yeah,
absolutely true.
it's hard giving that up too. But at some point you realize, they could get it done in about a minute. It would take me, 15. So, and I love your whiteboard idea, by the way. I may adopt that. And I have a feeling people watching this at the conference, I think whiteboards there's gonna be a peak in
Yeah.
on Amazon. I have a really
Cool.
large one in my office that I write on, but the smaller ones, I never thought about that. So
Yeah.
wonderful tip for
So
that
helpful.
as well. Yes, yes. So that concludes our 2021 LHON panel.